I saved $300,000 for retirement, paid off a $450,000 home, and gave 35 years to a man who stole it all to support a secret family. My sons sued me for half. They left me broke and alone. I didn't cry, I calculated. What I did with their lies. Unforgettable. I never thought I'd be telling my life story like this. Not as a celebration of love or legacy, but as a quiet confession of how everything I trusted broke, piece by piece. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 59 years old. I was an accountant for over 30 years, living what I thought was a comfortable, honest life in Seattle. Richard Bennett was my husband. For 35 years, I called him my partner, my best friend, and the father of our only son, Ethan. We weren't flashy. We never aimed for big city luxury or wild adventures. Richard liked his routine, coffee black, toast slightly burnt, NPR on the radio. I liked balance sheets, weekend gardening, and Sunday dinners. We raised Ethan in a modest 2-story house near Green Lake. The kind of neighborhood where neighbors wave from their porches and dogs bark more than cars honk. Every month, we set aside money into savings. I handled all the finances. Richard said he didn't have the patience for it. That numbers made his head spin. So I took care of everything: taxes, insurance, budgeting, retirement planning. By the time I retired at 58, we had close to $300,000 saved in retirement accounts. We talked about renting an RV, driving down the coast, maybe seeing San Diego and stopping by vineyards. That was the dream. A quiet, easy future. No alarms. No meetings. Just me, him, the open road, and old love. But dreams rot quietly, especially when someone else has already moved on without telling you. It started with a phone call. Just a random one. I was checking our online banking like I always did, and I saw a transfer I didn't recognize, $7,500 wired to an unfamiliar name. I remember my stomach turning in a way I couldn't explain. I asked Richard about it that night over dinner. He barely looked up from his plate and muttered something about a consulting fee. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me, maybe the accountant, maybe the woman, felt a shift. So I checked again the next morning. That led to more digging, more statements, more lies. I found regular transfers, hotel bookings, a separate checking account, plane tickets to California, and finally, a transaction for a beachfront condo in San Diego. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Danielle. She was quick, sharp, didn't waste time sugarcoating. Within a week, she had the details. Richard had a second life. A woman named Marissa, 31, worked part-time at an art gallery. 2 kids. Neither carried his last name, but both were his. I remember sitting on the couch, phone in one hand, printed bank statements in the other. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was numb, like someone had cracked my ribs and scooped out my lungs. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. Just leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, eyes dull. Like it was all a chore he didn't want to deal with. "You were always so busy," he said. "Everything was numbers and order with you. I needed something real. Something real." That's what he called a double life funded by my planning, my budgeting, and my trust. 2 weeks later, I got the divorce papers. No real explanation. No apology. Just a man who wanted to move on cleanly, like I was an old coat he no longer needed. I was still in shock when he moved out, though most of his things had already been moved into his new life. He left behind only the memories and silence. But it didn't stop there. Richard told Ethan lies. Told him I'd hoarded the house under my name, that I had cut him out of his inheritance, that everything we had built was rightfully his. And my son, my own flesh, believed him. Maybe not right away, but enough to turn cold. "I'm not choosing sides, Mom," Ethan said over coffee one morning after the divorce started. "But I think you should be fair about the house. Dad was there too." Fair. That house was in my name. I bought it after a decade of working 12-hour days, while Richard drifted between freelance gigs and business ideas that never lasted. I paid the mortgage. I paid for Ethan's schooling. I bought groceries. I fixed broken sinks. Richard liked to say he managed the bigger picture. But in reality, I managed the daily grind while he daydreamed. Still, Ethan filed a lawsuit against me. Demanded half the house's value. Claimed it was marital property, and as the only child, he was entitled to a share. I didn't fight with rage. I didn't scream. I didn't even argue. I just packed. Quietly. One room at a time. I moved out before the court date and went to stay with my old friend Marlene, who had a tiny basement apartment in Ballard. No windows. Musty walls. A space heater that groaned more than it worked. For the first time in decades, I was no one's wife, no one's mother, no one's partner. I was Claire. Just Claire. Eating canned soup. Staring at spreadsheets on a cracked laptop. Wondering how everything had turned so wrong so fast. And then something happened. One night, I was sitting in the basement, scrolling through old tax files. I opened a spreadsheet I'd made years ago, our retirement ledger. I stared at the columns: deposits, compound interest, projected returns. Richard forgot I used to audit corporations for a living. He forgot that I knew how to follow paper trails, how to sniff out inconsistencies, how to trace money even when people tried very hard to hide it. That night, something in me snapped back into place. I wasn't just a hurt woman anymore. I was something else, something sharper, more dangerous. I remembered who I was. And Richard? He had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he'd won. He had no idea the game hadn't even started. The day I decided to fight back wasn't dramatic. No music swelling in the background. No lightning striking. Just me, sitting alone in Marlene's damp basement, cross-legged on the old carpet, staring at numbers on a laptop screen. I had spent my life making numbers talk. Now they were screaming. The transfers Richard made weren't just impulsive. They were methodical. Monthly payments to a bank in the Cayman Islands, sometimes routed through a shell company in Nevada. He'd opened those accounts years ago. Maybe he never planned to spend retirement with me. Maybe I was always just the backup plan. I didn't cry anymore. That part of me had dried up. Instead, I got organized. I printed documents, created timelines, traced transfers, labeled accounts. I used the same forensic tools I'd once used to audit shady startups. I documented everything, down to the timestamp of each transaction. Marlene walked in one evening, holding 2 mugs of tea. She saw my notes spread across the floor and paused. "Claire," she said, setting one mug beside me, "you're not just looking at this. You're preparing something." I didn't answer right away. "I'm going to bury him," I said finally. Not with anger. With facts. I started with the IRS. An anonymous tip. The offshore accounts, the undeclared income, the false write-offs. Everything backed up by documentation. No exaggerations. Just cold, hard evidence. I knew how long these investigations took. I also knew what they looked for. Richard had filed at least 5 years of tax returns with numbers that didn't match his actual income streams. He thought hiding money overseas would protect him. But I'd seen too many executives lose everything over the smallest discrepancies. I didn't stop there. I contacted a financial crimes unit with a secure folder, encrypted, locked, untraceable, detailing how Richard used marital funds to buy property under another name. His business expenses were actually plane tickets, hotel stays, and child support payments for his secret family. I attached copies of receipts, booking confirmations, and photographs Danielle had sent me. Marissa and the kids. The condo. The private school. It was enough to start a fire. But I didn't stay around to watch it burn. Not yet. Because I had one more battle left, Ethan. The court date for the property dispute was approaching. I hadn't hired a lawyer. I couldn't afford one. But I knew the system. I knew documentation mattered more than emotion. Ethan hadn't reached out since the suit. Not once. No messages. No explanations. Just a stranger who once called me mom. Now treating me like a barrier to his inheritance. When the hearing began, I walked into the room wearing a plain navy coat and carrying a worn leather file. Ethan was already there, dressed in a pressed blazer, seated beside a lawyer who looked like he hadn't read the case file. "Ms. Bennett," the judge nodded. "You're representing yourself?" "I am, Your Honor." The arguments were simple on his side: marital property, community state, entitlement. When it was my turn, I stood quietly and opened the folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I just laid out the facts. Bank statements proving I'd made every mortgage payment from my personal account. Utility bills in my name. Maintenance receipts. Tax documents. Purchase records showing I bought the house before Richard even had a steady income. I had also brought a forensic audit showing that Ethan had accessed and altered several digital documents to make it appear as though Richard had contributed financially to the property. Metadata told the real story, modified from Ethan's home IP address 2 months before the filing. I saw it, the flicker in the judge's eyes. The shift. "Mr. Bennett," the judge turned to Ethan, "did you knowingly submit altered documents as part of your claim?" Ethan didn't answer. His lawyer began to stumble through an explanation, but the judge raised a hand. "I'm dismissing the claim, and due to the fraudulent evidence submitted, I'm ordering an immediate review of your financial activities." You may also face sanctions. I didn't look at Ethan as I walked out. I didn't need to. Later that night, Marlene poured us 2 glasses of wine. I didn't feel victorious. Just hollow. Lighter in some places, heavier in others. How did it feel? She asked. Like closing a ledger, I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Within weeks, the consequences started catching up with both of them. Richard's accounts were frozen. A formal audit had been launched. The condo in San Diego? Under investigation. His business? Closed. Marissa disappeared off social media. Rumors said she left him once the money dried up. As for Ethan, the bank started foreclosure proceedings on his house. Turns out he had borrowed against it, expecting a payout from my property. He stopped responding to messages. I didn't chase him. For a while I lived quietly. I found a job consulting part-time for a nonprofit that protected elderly people from financial scams. Marlene helped me set up a small workspace in the basement. I spoke to women who had been manipulated by their children, men who had signed over power of attorney and then been abandoned. And little by little, something new grew in me, not bitterness but clarity. I understood what I'd been through, and I knew what I wanted to do with it. I used the small settlement from the divorce to invest in a duplex in West Seattle. I rented one unit and lived in the other. I started a fund for seniors in legal trouble. I began speaking at community centers about financial independence in retirement. My name started spreading, not just as a victim, but as a voice. One afternoon, while walking out of a senior seminar, I saw Ethan across the street. He was wearing a delivery company uniform, loading bags into a van. He saw me too. We locked eyes for a moment. No words. No wave. Just silence. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. He turned away first. I got in my car and drove home. Not every story ends with forgiveness. Some just end with truth. And sometimes that's more than enough. It's strange how quiet revenge feels when it finally settles. There were no fireworks. No loud apologies. No dramatic scenes. Just silence like the air after a storm. That's what my life became after the court cases, the audits, the closure. Quiet, but not empty. I kept living in that small duplex in West Seattle. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every tile, every wall, every bit of it belonged to me. Paid for by the same careful hands that Richard once underestimated. I furnished it slowly. A second-hand couch. A sturdy kitchen table. Plants by the window. Marlene helped me paint the walls a warm sand color. We joked that even the paint had better character than Richard. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't drowning either. I consulted part-time for the nonprofit, working mostly from home. People started calling me directly, friends of friends, neighbors, even a retired nurse from Spokane. They all had similar stories. Sons taking over accounts, daughters draining savings, husbands hiding pensions. Their stories sounded different, but the pain in their voices was the same. I feel stupid, one woman told me over the phone. I gave my son my debit card while I was in the hospital. When I got out, he'd bought himself a car. No, I told her gently. You're not stupid. You're trusting. And people took advantage of that. That's what I kept seeing, trust being turned into a weapon. I couldn't fix everything for them, but I could show them how to take back control. I helped them check credit reports, freeze accounts, request statements. We didn't just talk about numbers. We talked about boundaries. About survival. Word spread. Slowly at first. Then faster. I started getting invites to speak at community centers. Churches. Retirement groups. How to protect yourself from family financial abuse. That's what they called it. At first, I hated the label. It sounded so harsh. But maybe it needed to be. Because the wounds didn't come from strangers. They came from the people we tucked in at night. The ones we cooked for, sacrificed for, cheered for at school plays. Like I did for Ethan. Some nights, I still thought of him. Not with rage, not anymore. Just a dull ache, like a bruise that would never fully fade. I had loved him. Raised him with every ounce of energy I had. And when he turned on me, it cut deeper than Richard's betrayal ever did. But I never reached out. I didn't try to fix it. That was my old self, Claire the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who patched holes in everyone else's lives while hers quietly crumbled. Not anymore. One day, Marlene came over with 2 coffees in hand. She flopped onto the couch and stared at me with that look she always gave when she was about to say something bold. You ever think about going public? She asked. I blinked. Public? Yeah. Your story. The whole thing. Name changed if you want, but people need to hear it, Claire. I shook my head. It's not a story. It's just what happened. That's exactly why you should tell it. At first, I dismissed the idea. But it lingered. Like a whisper I couldn't shake. I started writing, quietly after dinner. Just a few lines at a time. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I wrote about the betrayal, the basement, the investigation, the courtroom. I wrote about the silence in my house after Ethan left. About the way the tea tasted after I realized I was alone. About the first morning I woke up without feeling like I had to explain myself to anyone. And slowly something shifted. I wasn't just documenting pain. I was reclaiming it. A few months later, a woman named Gloria from the nonprofit asked if I would speak on a local podcast about elder abuse. I said yes. Nervously. I remember sitting in the recording studio, headphones on, voice shaking. But once I started talking, I didn't stop. The words poured out. Not rehearsed. Not dramatic. Just truth. After the episode aired, my inbox filled up. People wrote in, thanking me. Sharing their own stories. A retired teacher whose daughter had drained her savings. A widower whose nephew sold his car without permission. A woman who had signed over her property deed without knowing what she was doing. I realized I wasn't just helping. I was giving people permission to speak. That podcast became a turning point. I was invited to do more. I wrote articles, gave workshops, helped develop a training module for local banks to recognize red flags in elderly clients' accounts. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt like I was building something. And then one day, something unexpected happened. It was a Sunday morning. I was on my front porch, sipping tea and reading an article on my tablet. My phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Claire. It was Ethan. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt still. Hi, I said. He was quiet. Then, I heard your interview. The podcast. I said nothing. I didn't know it was that bad, he said. I didn't understand. You didn't ask, I replied calmly. Another pause. I lost everything. The house. My job. I'm living with a friend now. I waited. I'm not calling to ask for anything, he added quickly. I just wanted to say. I was wrong. Those words hung in the air. I know you were, I said. But that doesn't change what happened. I know. We sat in silence for a while, not knowing how to fill it. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I haven't, I replied. And I might not. But I appreciate the call. Then I ended it. Not out of anger. Just because there was nothing else to say. When I set the phone down, I stared out at the street. People walked by, dogs on leashes, kids on bikes. Life moved forward. Quietly. Gently. I took a sip of tea. And I smiled. Not because it was over. But because I was still standing. People think revenge feels like fireworks. A loud, blazing moment where everything explodes and justice rains down in a dramatic scene. But the truth is, it's much quieter. Revenge, real revenge, feels like peace. It feels like no longer flinching at the sound of your own name. It feels like drinking tea on your porch in the morning without carrying the weight of someone else's lies. A year had passed since Ethan called me. We hadn't spoken since. He didn't call again and I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. That chapter, as painful as it was, had finally closed. But the pages stayed with me. Lessons inked into my skin, memories carved into the space behind my eyes. I didn't forget. I didn't erase. I just moved forward. By then, my small nonprofit consulting work had grown. Gloria helped me register as an official service provider for senior citizen financial protection. We named it Second Ledger. I thought it was fitting. Life doesn't always give you a clean start. But it does give you a second set of books, a chance to rewrite the numbers in your favor. I started getting calls from social workers, lawyers, even banks. They'd refer seniors who were confused about their finances, or whose children had suddenly become helpers after sniffing out retirement accounts. I met them in coffee shops, libraries, living rooms. I showed them how to check their credit, monitor account access, draft powers of attorney that protected them, not just trusted their families blindly. Some cried. Some were too proud. Most were just grateful that someone finally believed them. That work kept me busy, fulfilled, grounded. I felt useful again. Not just to others, but to myself. For so long, I'd measured my worth by being a good wife, a good mother. Now I was just Claire. No titles. No roles to play. And somehow that was enough. I saw Richard again once. It was by accident. I was at a bank downtown, helping a client dispute unauthorized withdrawals from her checking account. I stepped outside to take a call, and there he was across the street. He looked older. Thinner. Hair grayer, but not in a dignified way. He was arguing with someone on the phone, pacing back and forth in front of a pawn shop. I stood still. He didn't see me. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I just felt detached, like watching a stranger from a different life. He had lost everything. The audit had done its job. The IRS went after his hidden accounts. His assets were seized. The condo in San Diego was repossessed. His new life with Marissa dissolved the minute the money dried up. I heard she left him and moved in with her sister. Last I knew, he was couch surfing, trying to sell what little he had left to cover legal fees. I turned away and walked back into the bank. Didn't even glance back. Some people think justice is about punishment. But for me, it was about reclaiming what was mine, my voice, my peace, my time. I didn't need him to suffer to feel whole again. I just needed to know I wasn't powerless. One rainy afternoon, I was speaking at a retirement community just north of the city. I had done my usual presentation, walked them through red flags, and answered a few questions. As people were packing up, a woman in the back stood up slowly. She looked to be in her 70s, tall, proud posture, but her hands trembled slightly. "My son cashed out my CDs," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Said it was to help with his mortgage. He never paid me back." Everyone turned to look at her. She didn't seem embarrassed, just tired. Tired of carrying the silence. I walked to her, gently placed my hand over hers and said, "That wasn't your fault. But it's not too late to take your control back." She nodded and tears filled her eyes. That night, I thought about all the women like her. The ones who had been loyal mothers, devoted wives, and ended up discarded when they were no longer useful. That had almost been me. Not anymore. A few months later, Second Ledger received a small city grant. Nothing huge, but enough to hire a part-time assistant and move out of my dining room and into a shared office downtown. Marlene cried when she saw the place. "Look at you," she said, laughing. "From basement soup to business owner." I didn't feel like a business owner. I felt like a survivor who decided she was done surviving and ready to rebuild. Sometimes, when I walked through the city, I'd see familiar places that reminded me of my old life. The bakery where Richard used to buy our Sunday croissants. The park where Ethan rode his first bike. And for a split second, the grief would rise. But it never stayed. Because I wasn't living in the past anymore. One day, while walking through Pike Place Market, I saw a man sitting near the corner with a cardboard sign. His clothes were worn, his beard untrimmed. I didn't recognize him right away. But when he looked up, our eyes locked. It was Ethan. He looked startled, embarrassed, and tired. So tired. He opened his mouth to say something, but I walked past him without a word. A few steps later, I paused, reached into my purse, took out a single coin and walked back. I placed it gently in his palm. He stared at me, confused. I leaned in slightly and whispered, "Now you know what it feels like to be thrown away." And then I walked on. No turning back. No guilt. Just the sound of my own footsteps echoing down the pavement. Because this wasn't his story anymore. It was mine.